They say nothing ever happens in Ridgepoint Hollow, and that's a lie. Things happen here, but people don't talk about them. The air feels heavier at night, but not with fog or storm clouds, just a sense of something unseen pressing against your skin. The locals won't look you in the eye for too long, but they'll watch you from their windows. And when you walk the lonely dirt roads at dusk, you'll swear the forest is breathing. Ridgepoint Hollow doesn't just exist in the middle of nowhere. It is nowhere, and it doesn't let you forget that. If you enjoy chilling tales like this one, don't forget to hit the subscribe button, turn on notifications, and stay tuned for more spine-tingling stories. The day I arrived, the sky was so gray it looked like the clouds had been smudged by an unsteady hand. I'm Elliot Price, 31 years old, a writer by trade, but a loner by nature. Life in the city had grown suffocating. Too many people, too much noise, and too many regrets piling up like unfinished chapters in a book I'd lost interest in writing. When I learned I'd inherited my great-uncle's house in Ridgepoint Hollow, I figured it was the universe giving me a chance to start over. A remote town with barely any cell service sounded perfect. I thought it would be quiet, easy, and uneventful. I was wrong. The moving truck struggled down the dirt road leading to the house. Dust clouded the air as the vehicle rattled over every rock and pothole. The driver, a gruff man named Dale, glanced at me in the rearview mirror. "You sure about this place?" he asked, his voice low and hesitant. "Why wouldn't I be?" I replied, though the question had an edge to it that I didn't like. Dale shrugged. "Heard stories is all, ain't my business." He didn't say anything else after that, but his silence felt heavy, like it carried all the things he wasn't willing to say. The house came into view and my heart sank. It wasn't the charming, rustic cottage I'd imagined. Instead, it was a two-story skeleton with peeling paint, broken shutters, and a sagging porch. The windows looked like dead eyes, black and unblinking. There was no welcoming warmth here, just the cold reality of abandonment. But I wasn't one to back down from a challenge. I've always been stubborn to a fault, the kind of person who would rather figure things out alone than ask for help. People used to tell me I was too self-contained, too independent. "You build walls instead of bridges," my ex had once said. Well, now I had a whole house full of walls, and no one to share it with. I spent the afternoon unloading boxes and clearing out cobwebs. The air inside the house was stale, carrying the faint scent of decay and mildew. I found a few relics of my great-uncle's life. A dusty armchair, a shelf filled with yellowed books, and a cracked picture frame on the mantel. The photograph was faded, but it showed a younger version of him standing with two other people, their faces obscured by time. I set the frame back down, feeling a strange chill crawl up my spine. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the house grew darker, colder. I lit a few candles, their flickering light casting shadows that seemed to stretch and sway unnaturally. I told myself it was just my imagination, just the unfamiliarity of the place playing tricks on me. Then came the knock. 3 sharp raps on the front door, loud and deliberate. I froze, my heart hammering in my chest. The house was miles from the nearest neighbor. Who could possibly be at the door? "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. There was no answer, but I could hear the faint sound of footsteps retreating, crunching against the gravel path. When I opened the door, no one was there. Just the night, dark and sprawling, and a trail of muddy footprints leading away from the porch. The next day, I decided to explore the town. Ridgepoint Hollow was small, barely more than a handful of buildings clustered around a single main street. There was a diner, a post office, a gas station, and a general store. The people I passed were polite but distant, offering nods and brief smiles before looking away. At the general store, I met Martha, a thin, weathered woman in her late 60s. She was the first person who seemed genuinely curious about me. "You must be the new tenant up at the old Price house," she said, her voice carrying a faint southern drawl. "That's me," I said, introducing myself. Martha nodded thoughtfully. "Your great-uncle was a good man, but, well, he kept to himself. I suppose that runs in the family." I smiled awkwardly, unsure how to respond. "Did you know him well?" "Not as well as I would have liked," she admitted. "But he always stopped by for bread and milk. Never missed a week." She paused, then leaned in closer. "Listen, if you're staying in that house, you should know. Keep the cellar door locked, always." "Why?" I asked, but she just shook her head and handed me my change. Back at the house, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The cellar door was in the kitchen, a heavy wooden thing with rusted hinges and a padlock. I tested the lock, tugging at it, but it wouldn't budge. Still, I didn't like the way it seemed to pulse in the dim light, as if it had its own heartbeat. I spent the rest of the day trying to settle in, but the house didn't make it easy. Every creak of the floorboards, every gust of wind against the windows, it all felt alive, like the house was watching me. I told myself I was being ridiculous, that I was just adjusting to the new environment. But then came the whispers. Faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. They drifted through the house like smoke, curling around my ears and slipping away before I could fully understand them. I walked from room to room, searching for the source, but there was nothing, just silence and shadows. That night, I dreamed of the woods. In my dream, I stood at the edge of the forest, staring into the darkness. Something moved between the trees, something tall and thin with glowing eyes. It beckoned to me, and I took a step forward before jolting awake, my heart racing. The dream felt like a warning, but I didn't know what it was trying to tell me. By the time the third night rolled around, I was questioning my decision to stay. The house felt less like a refuge and more like a trap. But I'm not the kind of person who gives up easily. I told myself I was being paranoid, that there was a logical explanation for everything. Then the knocking returned. 3 sharp raps, just like before. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a flashlight and flung the door open, determined to catch whoever was messing with me. But the porch was empty. The footprints were back, fresh and muddy, leading into the forest. And just beyond the tree line, something moved. It was too far away to see clearly, but it was there, tall and still, watching me. I slammed the door shut, locking it behind me. My hands were shaking, my breath coming in short, shallow gasps. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in the armchair by the window, clutching a kitchen knife and staring out into the darkness, waiting for something I couldn't name. And deep down I knew, this was just the beginning. The next morning, the air felt different. It wasn't colder or heavier, but it seemed sharper, like every sound carried an edge. I couldn't shake the image of the figure in the woods from my mind. Who or what had been watching me? I told myself it had to be a trick of the light, a shadow cast by the trees, or maybe just my imagination getting the best of me. But the footprints were real, and so was the knocking. That much I couldn't deny. I decided to spend the day unpacking and settling in. The house might have been unsettling, but it was mine now, and I needed to make it livable. I started in the living room, tearing open boxes and arranging furniture. The work kept my hands busy, but my mind wandered. What had Martha meant about the cellar? Why had she been so insistent about keeping it locked? Then I found the journal. It was tucked away in a box labeled miscellaneous, wedged between an old lantern and a bundle of brittle newspapers. The leather cover was cracked and faded, but the binding was intact. When I opened it, the pages felt delicate, as though they might crumble if I wasn't careful. The first entry was dated 1952, written in a neat, precise hand. The Holokin are restless again. I heard them last night, whispering beneath the floorboards. They never come inside, but I can feel their presence, always watching, always waiting. I don't know how much longer I can keep this up. I read the words twice, my pulse quickening. Who or what were the Holokin? The journal offered no immediate explanation, but the entries continued, each one more frantic than the last. The forest is alive. The trees move when no one's looking. The shadows have shapes now. I saw one of them yesterday, tall, thin, and wrong. They left a mark on my door. I scrubbed it off, but it came back the next day. I think they're testing me. The entries went on like this, each one a snapshot of paranoia and dread. My great-uncle hadn't just lived in this house, he'd been trapped in it. And now, so was I. By afternoon, the sky had darkened, though it wasn't raining. Clouds hung low and heavy, and the forest outside the window seemed to close in. I decided to explore the rest of the house. I hadn't gone upstairs yet, partly because I was nervous about what I might find, but also because I didn't like the way the staircase groaned beneath my feet. The second floor was even colder than the first. The air smelled faintly of dust and old wood, but there was something else too, something sour and faintly metallic. I checked the bedrooms first, finding little more than cobwebs and creaky furniture. The last room at the end of the hall was locked. I jiggled the doorknob, but it wouldn't budge. There was no keyhole, no obvious way to open it. The locked door felt like a challenge, but I decided to leave it alone for now. I wasn't ready to force it open. Back downstairs, I made myself a sandwich and sat by the window to eat. The forest outside was unnervingly still. The trees didn't sway, even though I could hear the wind. It was like the woods were holding their breath, waiting for something. I thought about the journal again, its cryptic warnings and fragmented thoughts. My great-uncle had clearly been terrified of the Holokin, but was it possible he'd just been paranoid? Maybe the isolation had gotten to him, warping his perception. But then I heard the footsteps. At first, I thought it was just the house settling, the old wood shifting under its own weight. But the sound was too deliberate, too rhythmic. Someone, or something, was moving around upstairs. I froze, my half-eaten sandwich forgotten on the table. The footsteps were slow, unhurried, but heavy enough to make the floorboards creak. They moved from one end of the hallway to the other, pausing briefly outside the locked door before continuing. "Hello?" I called out, though my voice was barely above a whisper. The footsteps stopped. I grabbed the flashlight and a kitchen knife, my heart pounding as I climbed the stairs. Each step felt like a lifetime, the creak of the wood beneath my feet amplifying the silence around me. When I reached the hallway, it was empty. The locked door was still shut, and the other rooms looked untouched. But then I noticed something new. A mark had been scratched into the wall outside the locked room, a crude symbol that looked like a jagged circle with an X through the center. The edges of the carving were fresh, the wood splintered, as if it had been done moments ago. I ran my fingers over the mark, my stomach twisting. It wasn't just a random scratch, it felt intentional, deliberate. I didn't know what it meant, but I was certain it wasn't good. I spent the rest of the day trying to distract myself, but the unease lingered. Every noise the house made felt louder, more menacing. I kept glancing at the windows, half expecting to see someone or something standing outside. That evening, I decided to visit Martha. She was the only person in town who seemed to know anything about my great-uncle or the house, and I needed answers. Her house was small and tidy, with flower boxes lining the windowsills. She answered the door almost immediately, as though she'd been expecting me. "I thought you might come by," she said, her expression somber. "Come in." I followed her into the living room, where a fire crackled in the hearth. The warmth was a welcome contrast to the cold, oppressive air of my own house. "I found a journal," I began. "It belonged to my great-uncle. He wrote about something called the Holokin." Martha's face paled. She set her teacup down, her hands trembling slightly. "You shouldn't be reading that," she said. "The more you know, the worse it gets." "What are they?" I pressed. "What are the Holokin?" She hesitated, her gaze fixed on the fire. "They're the reason this town is the way it is. Quiet, isolated. We don't bother them, and they don't bother us. That's the agreement." "But they've already bothered me," I said. "There were footprints outside my door, and last night I saw something in the woods." Martha sighed, her shoulders sagging. "Then the pact's been broken," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "What pact?" She didn't answer immediately, but when she finally spoke, her words sent a chill through me. "The Holokin were here long before us. This land belongs to them. When the town was founded, our ancestors made a deal. They'd leave the forest alone, and the Holokin would leave us alone. But the pact only holds if we respect the boundaries. If you saw them, it means they've taken an interest in you." Her words didn't make sense, but they felt true. I wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but then she stood, signaling the end of the conversation. "You should leave," she said. "Pack your things and go. This place isn't safe for you anymore." I walked home in the dark, the road stretching endlessly before me. The wind had picked up, but the forest remained eerily still, the trees standing like silent sentinels. I thought about Martha's warning, about the journal, about the mark on the wall. The house greeted me with its usual silence, but it felt heavier somehow, more oppressive. I locked the doors, checked the windows, and sat in the armchair by the fire. That's when I heard the tapping. Someone or something was walking through the house. The floorboards creaked, each step deliberate, unhurried. I turned off the flashlight and crouched low, straining to hear. The footsteps moved from room to room, pausing occasionally before continuing. Then they stopped directly above me. My heart was pounding so loudly I was sure whoever was up there could hear it. The silence stretched on, oppressive and suffocating. I held my breath, gripping the knife so tightly my knuckles ached. And then, with a deafening crash, the cellar door slammed shut. The noise jolted me into action. I bolted up the stairs, my mind racing. I pushed against the door, but it wouldn't budge. It felt as though something heavy was pressed against it, holding it in place. "Let me out!" I shouted, slamming my fists against the wood. But there was no response, only the faint sound of whispering from the hole below. I turned back, my flashlight trembling in my hand. The hole in the floor was still open, the whispers growing louder, more insistent. They seemed to fill the entire cellar, echoing off the walls, weaving through the air. I backed away, pressing myself against the door. The whispers formed words now, though I didn't understand the language. It was guttural and rhythmic, like a chant. Then something emerged from the hole. At first, I thought it was smoke, black and twisting, curling upward like tendrils. But then I realized it was solid, its form shifting and writhing as though it couldn't decide what to be. It moved with an unnatural grace, flowing toward me in a way that defied logic. I held the knife in front of me, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely keep it steady. The thing stopped a few feet away, its shifting form coalescing into a vague shape, tall, thin, and hunched, its head tilted, as though studying me. The whispers stopped, replaced by a low, guttural growl. "Stay back," I stammered, though my voice was barely above a whisper. The thing didn't move, but the growling grew louder, reverberating through the cellar. Then, with a sudden burst of speed, it lunged at me. I swung the knife wildly, the blade slicing through the air. It didn't connect with anything solid, but the creature recoiled, its form dissolving back into smoke. I didn't wait for it to recover. I threw my weight against the door, screaming and pounding with everything I had. Finally, the door gave way, and I stumbled into the kitchen. The house was silent again, as though nothing had happened. But I knew better. I grabbed my car keys and ran. I didn't stop to pack, didn't even put on my coat. I just got in the car and drove, the tires skidding on the gravel driveway as I sped away. The town was dark and empty, the streets devoid of life. I kept driving, past the diner, past Martha's house, past the edge of town. But then the road ended. It wasn't a dead end, not exactly. The asphalt simply stopped, replaced by dense forest. I slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a halt. My headlights illuminated the trees, their gnarled branches stretching toward the sky like skeletal fingers. I turned the car around, my hands trembling on the wheel. But no matter which direction I went, the road always led back to the house. By the third time, I realized there was no escape. The forest had trapped me, just as it had trapped my great-uncle. I sat in the car for what felt like hours, staring at the house. The windows were dark, the silhouette of the roof sharp against the night sky. The whispers had stopped, but I knew they were still there, waiting. I didn't want to go back inside. Every fiber of my being screamed against it. But I didn't have a choice. I stepped out of the car, the cold night air biting at my skin. The front door was ajar, swinging gently in the breeze. As I stepped inside, the floorboards creaked beneath my feet. The air was heavy, suffused with the faint hum I'd heard before. The cellar door was open again, and the whispers were calling my name. If you enjoyed this chilling tale and want to uncover more terrifying stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to our channel. Let us know in the comments what you think is lurking in the shadows of this story. And if you dare, share your own spine-tingling experiences. Turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next chapter of horror. Until then, stay curious and stay cautious.